In the medieval period, armor wasn't only a piece of defensive kit, it was also a statement of wealth and power. Kings and noblemen had their armor richly decorated. It was a merging of form and function, but it was also something for all to see, allies and foe, during tournament, joust of peace, and in war. Now, whenever we think of medieval armor and weapons, iron and various types of steel are metals we think of, but they weren't the only ones used. Sure, blades by this time were usually steel. But when it comes to maces, bronze head maces and brass head maces also existed. You probably see the pattern here. If it's a big lump of metal used to strike, it doesn't really matter what metal that is. But with armor, that's different. Gold is a very rare element, 0.004 parts per million in the Earth's crust, and it's that rarity, together with its density and other factors, that give it its value. And it's pretty. Compare that with iron, which is the base to make steel. Iron by mass is the most common element on Earth, right in front of oxygen. Iron is about 5% of the Earth's crust, making it the fourth most abundant element in it. Due to mass segregation, the core of the Earth is believed to be primarily composed of iron. The molten outer core is about 8,000 kilometers in diameter, and the solid inner core is about 2,500 kilometers in diameter. Iron is plentiful because of its nuclear stability in stellar nuclear fusion reactions. Gold instead is famous for its unreactivity, and because of that it's a great way to store your wealth. The likelihood that it will combine with other elements, rust or dissolve, is basically zero. It doesn't tarnish or alter with time. That is why, if you were given a choice between a cube of gold and a cube of iron, well, duh. Anything made of gold will persist for thousands of years. This is brass, by the way. Yeah, I wish. Look at this gold, for example. This is from the treasure of Varna. I will make a dedicated video because the story of this civilization is a fascinating mystery. However, for the purposes of this video, let me just tell you that this that you see is not 1,000 years old, not 2,000 or 3,000, it's over 6,000 years old, making it the oldest gold ever found. Look at the conditions. Impressive stuff. Gold is also a noble metal, meaning that it stands apart, barely reacting with the other elements in the periodic table. Well, if you were super rich, like a king or an emperor, and gold is such a great noble metal, wouldn't gold plates make for a great armor that would persist through time and need no maintenance? Well, surely steel and iron armor do rust, and that is a problem. In fact, that's why historically many solutions were invented, and servants such as pages and squires were constantly maintaining it, covering it with a thin layer of oil, ore and beeswax. Or, as they did in Japan, covering the bare metal with several layers of lacquer, or, for a better term for it, urushi, although Japanese historically accurate urushi is toxic, so don't do that. A full-plate golden armor would not have any problems with rust or the like. However, there are two main qualities that define the metal armorers used for armor: hardness and weight. Now, availability of materials also plays a pivotal role in the choice of what metals to use in order to produce weapons and armor, and that could explain the shift that happened in the classical period, so in the Roman era, from bronze to iron, but that's a discussion for another video. In fact, this video, link in the description. Hardness is a measure of the resistance to localized plastic deformation induced by either mechanical indentation or abrasion. In other words, it's a measure of how resistant solid matter is to various kinds of permanent shape change when a force is applied. The hardness and the corresponding compressive strength of the surface material used to make armor needs to be above a critical value in order for it to be effective, particularly against weapons of iron and steel. When compared, gold and iron, and even more so steel, are radically different in performance. Keeping in mind that there isn't one single kind of steel, and the variables in all the different kinds of alloys will change the results of any comparison between steel and gold, but we can safely say that any kind of steel will outperform significantly gold in any of these comparison tests. That shouldn't surprise us. Have a look at the Friedrich Mohs hardness scale. When the German geologist devised the scale of hardness that we use today, he used a simple principle to determine the grade for each material, which material can scratch it and which material it can scratch. For example, platinum, which has a hardness of 4 to 4.5, can be scratched by all materials that have a higher Mohs grade. However, it can in turn scratch any material that is graded lower. For example, gold, which has a hardness of 2.5 to 3. And here is where iron is in the scale and where several kinds of steels are. are. Gold is malleable and soft. Malleable meaning that it can be hammered or pressed into shape without breaking or cracking. How malleable is gold, you say? Just 1 gram of gold can be flattened into a 1 meter square sheet. How about that? Weight is where we have another big problem, because if you were to produce a full gold plate harness, well, that would weigh quite a lot. Although in this case, when we are talking about weight, what we are really talking about is density. When looking at gold, silver, copper and iron, gold, the densest of the four, has a density of 19.32 grams per cubic meter, silver 10.49, copper 8.96 and iron 7.874. Gold has many more protons and neutrons in the nucleus of each atom than iron does. Each gold atom weighs almost 4 times as much as each iron atom. In other words, there are nearly as many gold atoms as there are iron atoms per volume, but each gold atom weighs a lot more, so gold ends up denser. Thus, good luck wearing all of that, unless you have the 7th sense, I guess. But if the density of gold is higher than that of iron, then why is gold softer, even though it weighs more? Okay, the hardness of a material or metal is directly related to its atomic structure. Every metal has its specific crystalline structure with its own densely packed crystalline planes. Macroscopic hardness is generally characterized by strong intermolecular bonds, although I'm simplifying quite a bit here, as the behavior of solid materials under force is, well, complex. And that's why there are different measurements of hardness: scratch hardness, indentation hardness, and rebound hardness. Hardness is dependent on ductility, elastic stiffness, plasticity, strain, strength, toughness, viscoelasticity, and viscosity. Most metals and alloys crystallize in 3 very common structures: body-centered cubic, hexagonal close-packed, or cubic close-packed. Atoms in metallic crystals have a tendency to pack in dense arrangements that fill space efficiently. Gold's crystal structure is closed-pack, face-centered cubic. Imagine an atom of gold at each corner of a cube and in the middle of each face. Using up 74% of the space, this is one of the most efficient ways for spheres to pack together. Gold shares its face-centered cubic crystal structure with copper, nickel, platinum, and lead. Iron instead, at room temperature, has a body-centered cubic structure. In pure iron, the crystal structure has relatively little resistance to the iron atoms slipping past one another, and so pure iron is quite ductile or soft and easily formed. In steel, small amounts of carbon, other elements, and inclusions within the iron act as hardening agents that prevent the movement of dislocations. In contrast, gold atoms pass each other relatively easily, making the metal soft and malleable. So technically, you could make an armor of gold plate, but it would be extremely heavy and it would be too soft and easy to penetrate, not to mention extremely expensive. Now here's an interesting fun fact for you. A medieval full gold plate armor would have had an enormous weakness that medieval alchemists of the early 1300s and early 14th century would have been very familiar with. A specific solution called aqua regia, with an Italian pronunciation, in medieval Latin probably pronounced aqua regia. Still, what was it and why would it be a weakness for a gold plate armor? Aqua regia, meaning royal water, is a mixture of 2 acids, namely nitric acid and hydrochloric acid, at a specific ratio of 1:3. Now, the fumes produced by nitric acids are extremely dangerous, and if you happen to inhale them, they would produce nitric acids in your lungs, so don't do it at home, I suppose. But this solution would be this guy's worst nightmare. You see, most metals will dissolve in nitric acid, and many will dissolve in hydrochloric. Gold is untouched by both. However, the combination of the two, hence aqua regia, has the power to dissolve even gold. So in other words, if you have to fight a king or a duke in full plate gold armor, all you need is a little potion filled with aqua regia. You go like this, bye-bye armor. Now, even though all of the things we said sort of discouraged the idea of a full plate gold armor, still gilded armor existed, and all of these things didn't stop very successful and wealthy men to adorn and decorate their armor with a thin layer of gold on top of the steel. And when it comes to the medieval period, the technique used is usually called fire gilding. The reason why it's called fire gilding: powdered gold is mixed with mercury, creating a sort of amalgam, a paste if you will, that is spread over the surface that they wish to decorate, and then heat is applied. What heat does is that it makes mercury vaporize off, leaving only the gold chemically bound to the surface. Now this is interesting because the idea of adding heat is a very medieval thing, because the Romans didn't do it this way. They still did use mercury, or quicksilver as often called, but since the technique is quite complicated, perhaps it will need a dedicated video. And again, the fumes produced with this technique would be very toxic, so good luck with that, I suppose, for ancient armorers. But it is also fair to say that gilding was a very effective technique, in fact so effective that it would be even more durable than modern gold plating. Gold plating is instead an electromagnetic technique that allows the gold to be layered and deposited on the surface of the piece that you wish to decorate. Gold plating is a relatively modern technique. Instead, gilding is incredibly ancient, so much so that even ancient Egyptians, even before the Europeans and Phoenicians, used it thousands of years ago. What's incredibly interesting about gilding is that not only it was used to create sort of accents, for example, to gild the rims of the armor in order to give it a little bit of a contrast of both the silvery look of steel and the beautiful bright yellow gold look, but some kings and extremely wealthy people went all the way to having the entirety of the armor gilded. One of these would be King Henry VIII and his tournament armor. So in a way, we could say that even though full plate gold armor didn't historically exist for the reasons that we have brought forth with this video, fully gilded armor did exist. So period people did like the idea of having their entire suit of armor have the look of gold, appear as if it were made entirely in gold. However, in closure, it is important to say that full gold plate breastplates have been discovered. Although when we say breastplates, since we're talking about civilizations of like 5000 and 6000 BC, we're talking about pieces of jewelry, not breastplates in a later sense, as if a piece or a component of a full plate suit of armor. We're talking about something that would cover a little bit of your torso, and even though most archaeologists would say it would be for ceremonial purposes, my opinion to that is that rather than really being ceremonial, it probably was a way to say, look how rich I am so successful, get me the girls. But with all that being said, thank you so much, noble ones, for watching my video. I hope you liked it. If you did, please remember thumbs up. And if you're not yet members of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. If you had the means, would you get your entire suit of armor gilded? Would you go nuts and get an entire full gold plate suit of armor, regardless of the problems it might have? Or would you use that money to build another castle? Or a pair of castles? Well, let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye. If you're enjoying this video so far, please take a moment to check out my Patreon page. With as little as a $5 support, you can help us ensure that we can continue to produce high quality and high researched content. And at the same time, you get access to polls, extra videos, unlisted streams, and much more. Thank you so much.